Imagine playing a pickup baseball game featuring the best players of all time. Sounds like a great idea, right? Well, that's the premise behind Legends of the Diamond for the NES. And as a two-player game, it does work pretty well. However, if you're playing it against the computer, it's pretty bad. Well, trust me on this one, I know. I had this game when I was a kid. I was probably 8 or 9 when I got it. I don't remember if it was a Christmas present, a birthday present, whatever. I hope that my parents got this game on sale. Anyway, I remember playing the game a ton, and I can really clearly remember being very, very frustrated with it. So let me show you why. So as I just showed you, that player select screen is okay. It's not as cool as the one in Dusty Diamond's All-Star Softball though, and it doesn't have as many players. Plus, you kinda need to know beforehand who these guys are. The names really aren't descriptive. And unfortunately, the manual doesn't tell you anything. It talks here about how cool it would be to have Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Hank Aaron, Dizzy Dean, and so on play against each other. Now, this actually really is a cool concept, especially if you're a geek for baseball history the way that I am and the way that I was as a kid. But it's not always easy to figure out who is who. So you see how there's a guy here named Bill? That's Bill Freehand. Freehand was a catcher for the Tigers in the 1960s and 70s, if you didn't already know that. Now, Freehand did go to the All-Star game 11 times in his career, so this guy wasn't exactly like a plumber. But Bill also isn't exactly high up on the list of like the best players of all time. And Joe T down here is Joe Torre, who you probably know better as a manager than a player. Now, there's not a ton of players that are like that, guys who probably don't belong, but there are a couple. And the thing is that they really missed out on this game by not including certain players. You know, Shoeless Joe Jackson, Eddie Seacott, players like that from the movie Field of Dreams. Right, back in 1992, Field of Dreams was still a pretty big thing among baseball fans. I mean, it's a popular movie to this day. You would think that they would prioritize putting players like that into a game like this, putting them on the cover and stuff like that, but they didn't. Of course, it doesn't matter in the end since the stats that are displayed in this game are meaningless anyway. This is really obvious if you play the one-player tournament mode. With a team of all-time all-stars, you will still find it really hard to beat the team of nobodies that the computer has you face. Part of the problem is how quickly your pitchers tire. Cy Young lost his fastball for me by the 5th inning, which is ridiculous. Dizzy Dean did okay in short relief, I guess. But my all-star lineup couldn't manage a single run off of this team of nobodies. And that is a really frustrating feeling. Look, I understand that they didn't want to make this game too easy, and I know that it's hard to get the balance just right in an 8-bit baseball game. But seriously, they could have at least given the players some individual attributes, right? So Ty Cobb looks like Ty Cobb at the plate, sure. But he doesn't hit like Ty Cobb. Babe Ruth can barely hit a single. In fact, every single player in this game is completely nerfed. So where's the fun in this? Now, if you look closely at this game, you'll realize that it's a lot like 2 other NES baseball games that I've already covered. Take a close look at the fielding screens. You notice anything familiar? That's right, it looks exactly like fielding in Baseball Stars. And that means it looks the same as Little League Baseball as well. Legends of the Diamond isn't directly based on any Japanese game that I know of, but that part really doesn't matter. It's obvious from phrases like "game set" at the end of the game that this used a Japanese game engine. And that engine is the same one that we see in Baseball Stars. The difference, of course, is that Baseball Stars had awesome customization options. Legends of the Diamond, on the other hand, is totally stripped down. There's a tournament, sure, but it's nowhere near as cool as the one in Little League Baseball. But you know, the nice thing is that you do get the benefits of games like Baseball Stars in this game. And yeah, I'm talking about fielding. You can see that the fielding perspective is zoomed in way too far. But no matter where the ball is hit, you've always got a guy nearby. Now, when I was a kid, I discovered how this works. So check this out. I'm going to make this fielder leave the screen without getting the ball. The game always brings him back automatically. Now, the game won't force him to pick up the ball, but it always moves the fielder behind the scenes to get into the screen to sort of help you out. Now, I could spend hours trying to force the fielder away from the screen. And I actually did that when I was a kid. I guess that shows what kind of kid I was. Anyway, there are also a couple of interesting Easter eggs in the game that you can find. For example, you can get the players to trash talk in certain circumstances. And if you're lucky, you'll cause a brawl if you hit the batter with a pitch. And all of that is cool, I guess, but really the selling point of this game was that underlying idea, the concept that you're playing with the best players in the history of the game and kind of putting them together. Now, this is not a unique concept. You do see this come up from time to time in the world of baseball sims. Yeah, you know, the kind of funny tabletop games that I talk about every once in a while. You also get computer games like this one with no graphics and a textual user interface. In fact, if you haven't seen it yet, you really should check out my daily blog at the link in the description. Not only do I write a lot about baseball history, I also get really deep into the weeds about those sims that I loved to play as a kid and still play a lot today. Plus, you can also help support the channel and support my projects through the blog. Now, in these difficult economic times where I'm basically broke, I honestly could use all of the help that I could get. Anyway, if you're interested in supporting the channel, you should also check out the Patreon that I just opened, just opened as in this week. You see, I have access to tons of articles about baseball, including some that are kind of hard to find. I'm planning on sharing those full articles through my Patreon page. You will also be able to find a bunch of bonus videos there, including original game footage and other stuff that's hard to find otherwise. Again, check out the link to the Patreon in the description of the video. But, you know, I bring all of this stuff up because the idea of playing with the best players in the history of the sport is actually really popular. In fact, there's kind of a science behind how to do it the right way, and Legends of the Diamond doesn't do it the right way. So, as you probably remember, the players went on strike back in the summer of 1981. You might have seen my video about how Strat-O-Matic helped save baseball that summer. A lot of people played APBA that summer as well, though owner J. Richard Seitz was kind of worried that the 1981 season cards wouldn't sell very well at all. And so, in 1982, Seitz came out with what he called A Little Bit of Heaven on Earth, the original franchise All-Stars set. So the idea here was pretty simple. What Seitz did is he took the 25 best players from the original 16 teams that he could find, trying to balance them out by positions. So by original 16 teams, we're talking about the 16 teams that were in the major leagues going back to 1901 when the American League was formed. Because, of course, if you look at the 19th century, it's a different number every year, and the National League was more than 8 teams, and so on and so forth. Anyway, Seitz's idea was to fill those teams up with rosters that had the best players for each team. Each team had 15 position players and 10 pitchers. And so, for example, you could have an outfield of DiMaggio, Mantle, and Ruth if you wanted. And you could have spitballer Burley Grimes pitch in the rotation along with Sandy Koufax, Don Drysdale, and Don Newcomb. Now, I think I know the method by which Seitz put all of this together. So it seems that he sat down with the baseball encyclopedia that had just come out and simply found the best players for every position for every single one of the team that he was going to include. And I think he looked only at the hitting stats and the pitching stats. It turns out that the 4th edition of the Baseball Encyclopedia, the old Big Mac, was published in 1979. Here's the copyright page for proof. Now, that book does contain lifetime roster pages that look like this. However, I think it's much more likely that Seitz sat down with pages like this to look for outstanding seasons. Anyway, he indicated the year each player's performance is based on through printing on the envelope of each team like you see here. The most recent players were from 1979, like Steve Garvey of the Dodgers. Garvey's card is not a duplicate of his 1979 card either. For example, he's got play result number 12 on dice roll 26, not on 16 like the original 1979 set has. And some teams have 19th century players like Fred Tenney of the Braves. The same goes for Hugh Duffy, whose card is based on his 1894 season. Of course, now this setup is not quite like Legends of the Diamond, though the truth is with this set, just like any other baseball sim, it's really easy to redraft players and do whatever you want. This setup, though, is a lot more like that famous Versus RBI Baseball arcade game, the one that Atari put out in 1987. Remember my video about that? That was the version of RBI Baseball with rosters made up of the best players of all time. It's a lot of fun, though it's also kind of hard. The problem is that you're always facing great lineups when you're pitching. And you always have to worry about great pitching when you're hitting. The concept behind the original franchise All-Stars was very similar. You take the best players in the history of the sport, you stick them together, and you see what happens. Now, the thing is that there are 2 problems with this. One of these problems is obvious if you've ever played APBA before. The other one, though, applies to every single one of these greatest teams and greatest players projects that you see. The obvious issue has to do with APBA's pitching system. The teams in the original franchise All-Star set have great pitching. Most of these guys have B grades or better. Now, the great pitching means that they won't give up many base hits. However, because of how APBA is designed, they will give up extra base hits. Well, if that seems bizarre to you, it's because it is bizarre. I mean, if Christy Mathewson pitches to Babe Ruth, why would it be more likely that Ruth would get a hit that's an extra base hit than an actual single? But that's the way APBA is designed. And so original franchise All-Star replays tend to have low batting averages. They also have high slugging percentages and high numbers of runs scored. It's an interesting concept, sure, but it really doesn't work all that well when you put it to the test. Well, this is a really specific, APBA-specific problem, and there are 2 possible solutions. So you can go through and give all of the pitchers new grades, which is probably what you should do, or you could randomize the hit numbers and turn some of the extra base hits into normal base hits. Anyway, other sims do not have that exact problem because they're not composed the way that APBA is composed, but they do have some similar issues. So Strat-O-Matic, for example, never came out with a set like this, but this is what would happen if it did. You'd get a ridiculously stingy card like this 1968 Bob Gibson card, right? Now, let's say for the sake of argument that you've got the 1962 Mickey Mantle card as well. I'm picking on this Mantle because I happen to have this card scanned. Half the time, Gibson will basically be unhittable, but the other half of the time, Mickey Mantle will win the matchup. So in other words, in Strat-O-Matic, neither player will really have the upper hand. Gibson will end up giving up more runs in your replay than he did in real life since he will face better hitters on average than he did in 1968. And Mickey Mantle will probably hit worse than he did in 1962 since he's facing better pitching in a theoretical league like this. Now, this is really close to a concept that we call normalization. This is an abstract concept that can be really difficult to understand. So let me show you how this works. About 1.5 years ago, I made a video where I stuck Barry Bonds into the deadball era using OOTP. Now, as you already know, Bonds was an incredible hitter for his entire career. There are people who argue left and right about what Bonds could have done if he played in the dead ball era. All right, every time that we talk about this, we get the same people bringing up the same thing. Some people think that modern players are simply bigger, stronger, more athletic, more capable, and that they would destroy the older players, which is true, right? But they've had a lot of modern conditioning. Now, there are other people who reply that the conditions were harder back in those days. You have to remember there was no night baseball. You have dust blowing up all over the place. If you're playing at that awful Washington Park in Brooklyn, you've got like explosions in the factories across the street and soot coming over, getting in your eyes and stuff like that. Plus, a player like Barry Bonds wouldn't have been able to play anyway because of the racial issues of the day. But the truth, of course, is that this debate is really only fun if we kind of ignore those problems and if we look at a mathematical way to normalize, to make it so that players are on an even playing field. And so I let OOTP work its magic automatically. Bonds started with Boston in 1901 and only hit 5 home runs, though he did steal 17 bases. By the time his career ended at age 44 in 1925, Bonds had put together an incredible lifetime history. But notice that he only hit 276 home runs, not the 762 he hit in real life. Now the reason why is because OOTP automatically normalizes his stats. In other words, there's an internal algorithm in OOTP that we can't see that takes away the ballpark and the era and stuff like that, and takes Barry Bonds, reduces him to something like his power number or whatever, and then sticks him in another era, sticks him in whatever year it is we want to stick him in. And it works pretty well, but there is a problem. Now you can see that problem when you look at Bonds' slugging percentage numbers in this project. The numbers are okay, but they're really not like all-time great. As you can see here, the home run totals are appropriate, but he wasn't legging out a lot of doubles and triples the way that power hitters did in that era in real life. And so even though he played well, the experiment was honestly a bit of a letdown. So you're going to have a problem like that anytime you do this algorithmically. You see, the issue you have with mixing players from different eras is that you really need to take care to mold the star players a little bit to look more like star players would in the new era. I'll give you another example of how this could work. We'll use an example that you might not really know much about. Okay, Owen Wilson hit 36 triples in 1912. That's a record that will never be broken. The record will never be broken because modern ballparks are a lot smaller than the ones that he played in. Now, if you took Owen Wilson out of 1912 and stuck him in 2025, he would likely hit a lot more than the 11 home runs he hit in 1912. That's because a lot of his extra base hits really should be converted to home runs in 2025. But the thing is that there's not really a good mathematical way to make that type of adjustment. You would really need to make it on a case-by-case basis, sort of like with the touch of the master's hand. Now the reason why I say that is because you still want Ty Cobb to play like Ty Cobb. You don't want Babe Ruth to suddenly play like Dave Kingman. Stick Ruth in 1977 and maybe he plays like Reggie Jackson, sure. But you still want Mr. October to be distinct from Babe Ruth. Anyway, as you can tell, I could talk about this topic forever. In fact, I've had a lot of conversations with Bill Staffa over at Skeetersoft about this very thing. It's a fascinating topic, and it's something I really wish that they would have considered in Legends of the Diamond. You see, in this game, the players are just simply nerfed. It's a difficult game to play, and that makes it not a lot of fun because you're supposed to be playing with the best of all time. GamePro really said it best when it noted that the game was really only fun for an afternoon, maybe as a rental. And unfortunately, at least from what I've been able to see, none of the other video game magazines from that era bothered to give this game a score. Now you do have to remember that the early 1990s was still a period where these publications were really just advertisements for the game companies, but it is a shame. I mean, I really wanted to know like what people thought about this game at the time. Anyway, it is a fun game, sort of. But if you want to pick your own side, you really need to play a Dusty Diamond instead. That game has better fielding angles too. Legends of the Diamond is pretty much a cheap version of Baseball Stars. Baseball Stars is actually a lot more satisfying. It really is a lot of fun to see your players grow. It's better to make your own Babe Ruth than to watch the real Babe Ruth fail to hit a home run off of a nobody. Now there's one other thing I've got to say about this game. I know this video is a little bit longer, but there's one thing that most people don't realize about this game unless you've actually owned the cartridge itself, and this is hilarious. I mean, the box looks okay, right? The brownish color is supposed to be gold, though I think it looks more like copper. Everything on the card and on the manual looks normal. But then you get to the end label. You see that? They couldn't even bother to spell the word diamond correctly. Anyway, that mistake right there really sums it up for this game. It's not an awful game, right? This isn't MLB by LJN. I'm never going to get over that one. Sorry, guys. But it's probably around an average baseball game for the NES. The thing is, though, there just was no quality control. Anyway, thanks for making it this far with me in this video. And like I said, make sure to take a look at the blog, take a look at the Patreon, see what you like. I've got a whole bunch more good stuff planned in the future, and I really could use your help and support. Thanks.